My wife cheated and asked for $3 million. The court ruined her plan. 15 years is a long time to learn somebody's habits. The way they hum when they make coffee. The way they roll their eyes when they pretend they are not impressed. The way they say I am fine when they are absolutely not fine. I thought I knew my wife like I knew my own business numbers. Steady, predictable, explainable. And if something went wrong, there was always a reason you could find on a spreadsheet. I was the guy people pointed at and said must be nice, successful company, nice house. One kid who actually hugged me in public, a face that did not scare mirrors, and a reputation for being kind. Which is funny because people treat kindness like it is a decorative pillow, cute but optional. I treated it like policy, like the way we do things around here, at home and at work. Then one random afternoon proved that life does not care about your policies. It will still walk into your living room and rearrange the furniture with muddy shoes. It started with something small, the kind of thing you would forget if it didn't turn into a disaster later. My wife left her phone on the kitchen counter. Face up, the screen lit up with a message preview. Just a name and a few words. And those few words were the kind that do not belong in a normal conversation between coworkers or friends. Nothing graphic, nothing I am going to repeat, but it was intimate in a way that made my stomach go cold. My first thought was that I misunderstood, because my brain wanted to be loyal even when the evidence was rude. My second thought was that maybe she was planning a surprise for me. Because denial is creative, it should get a job in marketing. I stood there with a dish towel in my hand like I was about to perform surgery on a broken plate, and I told myself to put the phone down. Be respectful. Do not be that guy. The jealous guy. The paranoid guy. The guy who snoops because he cannot handle being an adult. I told myself all that while my hand picked the phone up anyway the way your hand reaches for a hot pan because you forgot you are not wearing a glove. And yes, I know how it sounds. The successful guy with the calm life turning into a detective over a glowing rectangle. But here is the thing. Trust is a luxury item. And in that moment, I felt it slipping out of my hands like loose change. I opened the thread, and the messages were not one weird line taken out of context. It was a full conversation with history, pet names, private jokes, little plans hidden inside. Normal-looking sentences, like they were smuggling a second life through my own kitchen. I scrolled with my thumb, and the room started feeling too quiet, like the house was holding its breath, and I saw dates. I saw times. I saw the pattern. The same pattern I would have caught in my company's books if money was disappearing. Only this time it was my marriage disappearing, line by line. I sat down because my legs forgot what their job was, and I read enough to understand one thing clearly. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a harmless friendship. This was not a movie plot that would resolve if I just asked the right heartfelt question. This was betrayal, real and organized, with effort behind it. And what shocked me the most was not the existence of the other man. It was the confidence, the casualness, the way they talked like I was furniture, like I was an appliance that ran in the background and only needed maintenance once a year. I remember thinking, wow, so this is what it feels like to be edited out of your own life. I put the phone down exactly where it was, because I did not want her to walk in and see it in my hand and turn this into a fight about privacy. I did not want my first response to be chaos. I wanted facts. I wanted a plan. I wanted to act like the man I believed I was, not the man this situation was trying to turn me into. My heart was pounding, but my face stayed calm. Because sometimes dignity shows up like a security guard, late but useful. I looked around the kitchen and everything looked normal. The fruit bowl, the mail, the kids' backpack by the door. And that normality made me feel like I was the only person in the house who knew the building was on fire. I heard the garage door start to rise, and I realized she was home. And in the split second before she walked in, my brain started doing math, not business math, survival math. Do I confront her now? Do I pretend nothing happened? Do I call someone? Do I leave? Do I breathe? She walked in smiling, holding a bag from the grocery store like she was bringing peace offerings, and she said, "Hey babe." You would not believe the line at the store. And I heard my own voice answer like an actor who forgot the script changed. I said, "Yeah, crazy," and I hated myself for sounding normal. She kissed my cheek, quick and light, and my skin reacted like it did not recognize her. She started putting groceries away, humming like nothing in the world was wrong, and I watched her hands move and thought, how long have you been practicing this performance? I did not accuse her. Not yet. I asked one harmless question. How was your day? And she said the usual. Meetings, errands, traffic. And each word felt like a coin dropped into a jar labeled lies. Our kid came running in from the living room, talking about school and a drawing they made, and I smiled and praised it, because my child did not deserve to be the first casualty of my wife's choices. I waited until bedtime. I did the routine, story time. Lights out. The The small domestic rituals that suddenly felt like props in a play I no longer wanted to star in. And when the house finally quieted down again, my wife sat on the couch and started scrolling on her phone, the same phone, and my chest tightened like a fist. I realized she was relaxed, not worried, not guilty, which meant either she was incredibly confident or I had been incredibly blind. I went to the kitchen under the excuse of getting water, and I stared at the counter where her phone had been, like it was a crime scene, and in my head I heard a new voice that sounded like me but colder. It said, "Do not be dramatic, be strategic, because the minute you show your hand, she will start playing hers." And I understood something that night. The betrayal was not just emotional, it was logistical, because a person who can hide a whole relationship can hide money, can hide assets, can rewrite narratives. And I had worked too hard to build my life to let someone else rewrite it like it was a bad resume. So I made a decision that felt strange in my mouth, like a word I had never used before. I decided I would not explode. I would investigate. I would protect my child. I would protect what I built. And I would not beg, because I knew my worth even if my wife apparently forgot it existed. And as I stood there with a glass of water I did not even drink, I realized the next phase of my life had just started, and it was going to be quiet, careful, and ruthless in the most legal way possible. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, which never happens unless my brain is staging a protest. My wife was still asleep, breathing calmly like a person with no secrets, and I watched the ceiling and felt strangely clear, not calm, but organized, like my emotions had lined up and were waiting for instructions. I did not confront her. I did not check her phone again. I did not sigh dramatically by the window. I got up, showered, dressed, and made breakfast for our kid. Because routine is a powerful disguise. It tells the world everything is fine while you are quietly reinforcing the foundation. I drove my child to school and smiled and waved and said, "Have a great day." And when the car door closed, I sat there for a few seconds longer than usual, hands on the steering wheel, thinking about how one person's choices can split your life into before and after without asking permission. My first call was to my parents, not because I needed comfort, but because I needed witnesses, people who knew me, knew my character, knew the life I built from the ground up. I told them everything in a calm voice that surprised even me. There were pauses on the other end, the kind where you know someone is staring at a wall trying to process reality. My mother asked if I was sure, gently, like she was hoping I had misread a sign. My father did not ask many questions. He just said, "Whatever you need, we are with you." And that sentence felt like someone handed me a shield. I called her parents next, which was not an easy decision, but I have always believed in clarity over comfort. I told them the facts, no embellishment, no insults, just what I saw and what it meant. There was shock, there was denial, there were apologies that were not really for me, but for the situation, and eventually there was agreement on one thing. This was not my fault. Hearing that from both sides mattered more than I expected. I went to work after that, because my company does not pause for personal earthquakes, and strangely enough the office felt safe. Numbers made sense, problems had solutions, people were honest about what they wanted. I handled meetings, signed documents, joked with my team, and no one suspected that my marriage was quietly imploding behind my eyes. During lunch, I made the most important call of the day. A lawyer recommended by a friend who once described him as polite but dangerous, which sounded perfect. We scheduled a meeting for the next day, and just knowing there was a plan forming made my breathing easier. That evening at home, I was careful, observant. I noticed things I had ignored before, how my wife guarded her phone, how she answered questions with a little too much detail, how she smiled at moments that did not require smiling. I did not accuse her. I did not hint. I asked neutral questions and stored the answers away like files. She talked about money casually, upcoming expenses, future plans, and I realized she was already negotiating in her head, already assuming a different version of the future where I was an obstacle instead of a partner. The meeting with the lawyer was like stepping into a different climate. He listened without interrupting, asked precise questions, timelines, names, patterns. He explained things clearly. No drama, no promises of revenge, just strategy. He told me not to confront her yet, not to move money suddenly, not to change my behavior too much, because patterns matter in court. He explained evidence, messages, financial records, witness statements, and the importance of patience. He said something that stuck with me. The person who stays calm usually keeps control. The person who panics usually loses leverage. From that day on, I lived two lives. The visible one where I was still a husband and father and businessman, and the invisible one where I documented everything: dates, conversations, financial movements, changes in behavior. I followed instructions exactly, because I understood this was not about winning an argument. This was about protecting my future and my child's stability. Weeks passed, and the tension in the house grew like humidity before a storm. And then one night, I noticed a shift. My wife became confrontational, defensive, suddenly interested in legal terminology, suddenly mentioning numbers, big numbers, like 3 million, said casually like she was discussing the weather. And that was when I knew she had figured out that I was not as clueless as she hoped. The quiet phase was ending, and the real game was about to begin. Once she realized I was not panicking, the atmosphere in the house changed. It was subtle at first. The kindness felt rehearsed. The questions sounded like interviews, and every conversation had a hidden agenda tucked inside it like a folded note. She started bringing up money more often, not directly asking for anything yet, just testing the ground, mentioning friends who divorced and walked away with huge settlements, saying things like you never know what could happen in life, which was ironic coming from someone actively making something happen. I listened and nodded and kept my responses neutral, because the less emotion you show, the more information people volunteer, and she volunteered a lot. Then came the night she decided to confront me, not about the affair, but about control. She said I felt distant, distracted, not present, and I almost laughed because that was the most honest thing she had said in weeks. She asked if there was something I wanted to tell her, and I said no, not yet, which clearly annoyed her, because she expected either denial or confession, not patience. That was the moment I saw irritation break through her calm, like a crack in glass. She started listing everything she thought she deserved, not emotionally, but financially. As if our marriage had suddenly turned into a business deal. She wanted to renegotiate on her terms. She demanded 3 million, said it plainly, confidently, as if she had rehearsed it in front of a mirror. She said it was fair, that she sacrificed years of her life, that she supported me while I built my company, that she was entitled to security. I listened without interrupting, and when she finished, I said, "We will discuss everything with lawyers present, because that is how adults handle serious matters." That response did not satisfy her. She wanted a reaction, anger, fear, bargaining, something she could work with. But calm frustrates manipulators more than yelling ever could. The next weeks were tense. She became colder, sharper, started keeping records of her own, staging conversations, making comments in front of others, laying groundwork. I could almost see the narrative she was trying to build: the neglected wife, the emotionally unavailable husband, the silent tension. Except facts are stubborn things, and I had mine organized. My lawyer prepared me for what was coming: false claims, exaggerated stories, selective memory. He said, "Do not take it personally. This is a strategy, not a confession of truth." When the legal process officially started, she went all in. Accusations that sounded dramatic but collapsed under basic questions, timelines that did not align, statements contradicted by messages and records. And through it all, I stayed composed, answered honestly, provided documentation, and trusted the process. Her lawyer tried to paint me as controlling and distant, but the evidence showed consistency, support, involvement, and most importantly, transparency. The court does not care about emotions as much as people think. It cares about patterns and proof. There was a moment during one hearing when she looked at me with disbelief, like she could not understand why her version of reality was not being accepted as fact. And I realized something important. She was not angry because she lost me. She was angry because she lost control of the story, and that was never hers to own alone. As the case moved forward, the 3 million demand evaporated, replaced by silence and frustration, and eventually by consequences she did not expect. When the final decision came, it was almost anticlimactic. Most of the property stayed with me, not as punishment for her, but because facts matter, and lies are heavy. They sink fast when you put them in the open. She walked away with very little, and I walked away with clarity. My child's life remained stable, my business untouched, my reputation intact. And when people asked me how I felt, I told them the truth, relieved, not victorious in a loud way, but in a quiet, grounded way. Looking back, I understand that betrayal does not end when you discover it. It ends when you stop letting it define you. I did not win because she lost. I won because I stayed myself, calm, strategic, honest, and aware of my worth. And that is a victory no court can take away. People think the story ends when the judge finishes speaking, like the credits roll and everyone leaves the theater, but real life does not work that way. The verdict was not an explosion. It was a quiet door closing. And when I walked out of that building, I felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because the uncertainty was gone, heavier because now I had to live with what remained. My wife did not look at me. She stared straight ahead like the floor might open and offer her a better deal. I wished her no harm, not because I am a saint, But because resentment is an expensive hobby and I had already paid enough, the first real challenge came at home. The house felt different without tension filling every corner. Silence is weight when you are not used to it. My child asked careful questions, not dramatic ones. Just simple, honest curiosity. Are we still a family? Where will mom live? Did I do something wrong? I answered each one slowly and clearly, because truth spoken calmly is reassuring. I told them none of this was their fault, that adults sometimes make choices that change things. But love does not disappear just because the shape of the house changes. I promised stability, routines, school mornings, weekend breakfasts, and I meant every word. Friends reacted in different ways. Some were angry on my behalf, some awkward, some suddenly very busy, which was useful information. Support does not always show up wearing a cape. Sometimes it just sends a text that says I am here if you need me. And that was enough. My parents were steady, hers were quiet, and I respected that. Everyone was processing their own version of the same event. I focused on mine. At work I noticed something unexpected. My focus sharpened. Without the background noise of suspicion and tension, my mind had space again. I made decisions faster, trusted my instincts more, even laughed more. Success feels different when it is no longer shared with someone who secretly resents it. I was not chasing validation anymore. I was building for myself and my child. Then there was the strange part, the absence of chaos. I had prepared myself for emotional whiplash, regret, second-guessing. But what I mostly felt was peace, not happiness yet. But peace is the foundation happiness stands on. I stopped checking my phone nervously, stopped replaying conversations in my head, stopped wondering what she was doing and with whom, because it no longer mattered. My life was no longer a shared document anyone else could edit. One evening I sat alone in the living room after my child went to bed, lights low, house quiet, and I realized something that made me smile. I trusted myself again, not just in business, not just as a provider, but as a man who can survive disappointment without becoming bitter. I had been tested in a way no balance sheet prepares you for, and I passed. Not perfectly, not heroically, but honestly, the story was not over. I knew that healing is not a straight line, and consequences echo longer than court dates. But for the first time since that phone lit up on my kitchen counter, I felt like the future was not something to fear. It was something to design, and I was back in control of the blueprint. Time did not rush to comfort me. It walked at a reasonable pace, like it expected me to keep up on my own. Weeks turned into months, and I learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. Alone is quiet. Lonely is noisy, and my house was finally quiet. I redesigned small things first, not the furniture but the habits. Morning workouts instead of staring at the ceiling, cooking real dinners instead of eating whatever was fastest, planning weekends instead of surviving them. These were not dramatic changes, but they were mine, and ownership changes how things feel. My ex-wife tried to re-enter the conversation in subtle ways. Messages about logistics that drifted toward nostalgia, comments about memories like they were coupons we could still redeem. I kept responses polite and brief, because boundaries are not walls, they are instructions, and I was done giving mixed signals. The more consistent I was, the more her tone shifted, from hopeful to frustrated to distant, and that told me everything I needed to know. People started asking if I would date again, like there was a schedule I had missed. I joked that I was dating peace right now, and it was going really well, but underneath the humor there was truth. I was learning to enjoy my own company without turning it into isolation. I took my child on small trips, nothing fancy, just places where phones stayed in pockets and conversation stayed real, and I watched confidence grow in both of us. One evening I ran into someone who knew both of us and tried to get information, try to understand what really happened. I smiled and said sometimes stories end because they are no longer honest, and that was all I owed anyone. I refused to audition for sympathy or approval. My life was not a courtroom anymore. The biggest shift happened. Quietly, I stopped replaying the past looking for mistakes to punish myself with. I accepted that love does not fail because one person is not enough. It fails when honesty leaves the room, and that realization was freeing. I did not need to rewrite history to justify the future. Late one night, I caught my reflection in the window. Older, calmer, sharper around the edges in a good way, and I laughed, because I looked like someone who had been through something and did not let it steal his sense of humor. I realized then that the betrayal had not broken me. It had clarified me, stripped away assumptions, distractions, and illusions I did not need anymore. I went to bed that night not wondering what I lost, but recognizing what I kept, my values, my dignity, my direction, and that was when I knew the suspense of my life was no longer about survival. It was about what I would build next. Just when life started feeling predictable again, it decided to test whether I was actually paying attention, not with drama but with irony. My ex-wife reached out asking to talk, not about logistics, not about our child, but about closure, that word people use when they want relief without responsibility. I agreed to meet in a public place, neutral ground, coffee, daylight, no nostalgia lighting. She arrived looking different, not worse, just less certain. Confidence looks good until it is no longer supported by outcomes. She talked a lot about mistakes, about pressure, about how things got out of control. She avoided the word choice like it was a slippery floor. I listened, because listening costs nothing and teaches you everything. She hinted at regret, not about the betrayal itself, but about how it ended for her. Lost comfort, lost status, lost access. And in that moment something clicked. This was never about love leaving. It was about entitlement staying too long. She asked if I ever thought about fixing things, and I answered honestly, no, because trust is not a decorative item you glue back together. It is a foundation. Once it cracks, you do not repaint it. You rebuild elsewhere. She nodded like she understood, but her eyes said she was still negotiating, still hoping for a different math problem where effort could change the answer. When we left, she thanked me for meeting her, and I wished her well, and I meant it in the way you wish someone well when you no longer need their approval. Walking away felt clean, not dramatic, just final, and I realized that closure is not something someone gives you. It is something you grant yourself when you stop asking why and start asking what next. That night I sat at my desk and opened a new document, not for work, but for life. Goals that had nothing to do with proving anything to anyone. Travel plans, personal projects, time commitments, things that made me curious again. I felt excitement without anxiety, ambition without desperation, the kind that comes from stability, not escape. I checked on my child before bed, peaceful, secure, unaware of the weight adults like to place on situations, and I felt proud, not because I won a case, but because I modeled resilience, calm, and self-respect, lessons that do not show up on report cards but shape everything. The betrayal had been the plot twist, but it was no longer the center of the story. It was just the event that forced me to level up. And as I turned off the light, I realized something almost funny. The life I was living now was quieter, simpler, and somehow far richer than the one I was fighting to save before. People often ask how the story ends. Like there should be a dramatic final scene or a perfect lesson wrapped in a bow. But the real ending is quieter and stronger than that. It ends on an ordinary morning when I wake up without tension in my chest, make coffee without checking anyone else's phone, and plan my day without accounting for someone else's secrets. It ends when stability stops feeling fragile and starts feeling normal. When trust in myself replaces the need to monitor others. I am still successful, not just financially, but mentally. My business grew because I grew. My decisions are clearer now that I am not negotiating with dishonesty at home. My child is thriving, laughing easily, secure in ways that matter, and I see in their confidence a reflection of choices I made under pressure. That is the kind of return on investment no market can match. I do not hate my ex-wife. Hate would mean she still occupies space rent-free. I simply understand her, and understanding is not the same as excusing. She made choices. I responded with structure, patience, and self-respect. The court outcome was just paperwork confirming what reality already knew. Integrity outlasts manipulation every time. Looking back, I smile at the man I was standing in that kitchen, holding a dish towel and a broken sense of reality. He did not know how strong he was yet. He thought dignity meant staying silent. Now I know dignity means choosing yourself without becoming cruel, walking away without burning the ground behind you. The suspense that once came from fear now comes from curiosity. What will I build next? Who will I become next? Not because I am running from the past, but because I am no longer trapped in it. Betrayal was the storm, clarity was the aftermath, and growth was the reward. If there is a lesson here, it is simple and unglamorous. Stay calm, gather facts, protect what matters, and never trade your values for temporary comfort. I did not need revenge. I needed alignment. And when that happened, everything else followed. This is not a story about losing a marriage. It is a story about keeping myself. And that is a win I will carry forward with my head high and my future wide open.